So tonight, we have been talking about all these things, and tonight we come to peace in our schedule. Have you ever been stressed out about your schedule? All right, how many of you have said this? I am so overwhelmed, busy, all right? And so running around like a chicken with your head cut off. At the same time, on the other hand, have you ever had times in your life where you didn't make good use of your time? Have you noticed that with teenagers, by the way? Don't make good use of your time. And so we were encouraged in the scriptures to redeem the time because the days are evil. And so today, we just basically are going to do about 3 questions. And hopefully these 3 questions will kind of guide us as we talk about finding peace in our schedule. Now, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and open your Bibles to Luke chapter 10 as we're getting ready. And we're going to spend a little time in Luke chapter 10. I'm also going to invite you to open your Bibles to John 5. So John 5 and Luke 10, we're going to be in John 5 first. So let me begin with a question. Does your schedule include time with Jesus, or is it centered around time with Jesus? It's up on the screen here in case you want to take a picture or see it. Does your schedule include time with Jesus, or is it centered around time with Jesus? Now let me pause. If I said right now, how many of your schedule includes time with Jesus, how many of you would raise your hand? Go ahead. All right, how many of you feel pretty good about that? Because you're looking at the room about the ones who didn't raise their hand, you're feeling superior. All right? But let's look at this question again and let it convict us, because it needs to. Does your schedule include time with Jesus, or is it centered around time with Jesus? I believe this is a problem in my life, your life, the life of our church, the life of the church. We have convinced people that if you give Jesus some of your time, that's all he needs. That's all you need. And so you can look around the room tonight. You can see that there are, I'm not being critical, but you can see there are many people who don't believe that it's needed to spend time at church on a Wednesday night. Now, again, I'm not being critical, but I don't know. I have been studying the Word of God for a long time. My grandfather's a pastor. My dad was a pastor. I've been in church my whole life. I've been in the ministry for 37 years, I think. And I've realized that I'm learning this stuff all the time. And literally, I told you the story about Sunday when the guy was getting air in his tire and he pulled in front of me. That was where my theology and what I'm studying on Wednesday night came into play. And instead of there fuming, waiting to put air in my tire, I sat there and I enjoyed a beautiful day. And I waited. And I was blessed for not losing it. And I had some of you totally fooled when I told you that guy came into church Sunday, didn't I? And so let's go back. If we're to be like-minded with Christ, if we're to have the mind of Christ, if the mind of Christ is to dwell in us, then how do you get it? Well, Henry Blackaby says this. Remember Henry Blackaby, wonderful Bible study author, the author of the Bible Study Experiencing God. Listen to what he says. A love relationship with God is more important than any other single factor in your life. Is there anybody who would disagree with that? Because what's the greatest commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So, let me ask you a question then. Honestly, do you believe this statement to be true? Do you believe that a love relationship with God is more important than any other single factor in your life? Do you believe that to be true? Some of you don't know yet. Do you believe it to be true? Second question, does your schedule reflect your answer to the above question? All right, that's convicting, isn't it? Angela Mills and I have been married now for 31 years, all right? And we like spending time together. Sometimes we like spending time apart. She said that. I didn't say that. But because we love one another, we try to do what? Spend time together. And so we try to do that. So, for instance, we'll go grab lunch together, or we'll go see a movie together, or we'll go take a walk together. Yesterday, we went out to the lake together to look at the shelter where we're going to be. And I don't say that to boast, but I love her, and I want to spend time with her. And so when you love God, should your schedule include time with Jesus, or is it centered around time with Jesus? It should be centered. And so I started ministry in 1987. So how many years ago is that? It's soon to be what? 36. All right. Never in 36 years have I ever had anybody come up and say, Pastor Tim, we need to have more things at church because I am just not getting enough. I want to be there more because I love Jesus and I want to have more studies about Jesus. I've never had anybody say that. Very rarely do we have somebody where we got to cancel Wednesday night. Oh, man, I can get there. I'll put snow chains on. I never had anybody say that. And so I think these are convicting questions. Is a love relationship with God more important than any other single factor in our life? And if so, does our schedule reflect that? Not are we making time for Jesus, but is our life centered around him? So again, what are we talking about tonight? Peace in our schedule. I shared this in a staff meeting, but there's a picture about what a college professor did with his students. When they first came in, he had a big, large glass jar, and then he had all these rocks on the table. And he had big rocks down to sand. And he asked the class to put all of it in. Put all of that in. And they really struggled with it. And they kept working. They finally figured out how they had to do it. You have to put the big ones in first. And then you have to start putting the smaller ones in. And the last one that has to go in are the what? The sand. Because it'll find its way. But if you put the sand in first, you put the smaller rocks in first, you know what you won't be able to do? Get the big things in. Is there anything in your life bigger or more important than a relationship with Jesus Christ? So if you want to have balance and peace in your life, what ought to come first? Time with Jesus. Does that make sense? All right. So, how did Jesus demonstrate this? I ask you to look at John chapter 5, verse 16 through 20. Here it is on the screen. Angela Mills, would you read that for us nice and loud, dear? All right, I want you to spend a little time there at the table, all right? I want you to think about what we can glean from this passage in regards to peace in our schedule. There you go. The word is aligned, and you nailed it. All right? Super genius. I knew it. You wouldn't let me down. So what do we see Jesus doing? This is the example that Jesus gives us. What did he do with his schedule? He aligned it with God. And so look here. God is working and has specific plans and purposes for each day. He says God's working. God's always at work, even to this very day. And so God didn't take a Sabbath and just stay on a Sabbath. Ever since the Sabbath, God's been working. And what has Jesus been trying to do? Rob, what's the word? Align. To be in step with, to be in line with God the Father. Second question, Jesus' first concern, second observation, Jesus' first concern was to align himself with the Father's priorities. And so whatever it was Jesus was doing on the Sabbath was something that his Father wanted him to do. Thirdly, through his fellowship with the Father, Jesus ordered his life around what he heard from the Father. I think that's beautiful, isn't it? Let's go back and look at it again. What did he hear from the Father? The Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees the Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. So what? He sees the Father doing it, and then he does it. It's no wonder Henry Blackaby made an observation out of these passages. When you line yourself with the Father, then you are putting the big rocks in the jar first. You are aligning yourself with the mind of the Father, the mind of Christ. So Jesus is our example, number one, of knowing that God has specific plans and purposes for each day. What does the Bible say? Seek ye what? First, the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all the other things will be added. So what's the important thing? Get the most important thing first. Second, Jesus wanted to make sure that whatever the Father was doing, he aligned himself with, and he got on board and he did it. And that, by the way, is the whole premise of the Experiencing God Bible study. See what God's doing and get on board with it. And that's the only way that can happen is by spending time with God. Not spending some time with God, but centering your time. By the way, did you see Jesus do this in his life? What did you see him do? Went on the mountain and prayed. And when going up in the mountain, we went up that mountain. Angela Mills and I went up on that mountain. After Jesus left the people with the fish and loaves, we went up to Mount Arbel. We only climbed the last third of it. I thought I was going to die. Jesus climbed that mountain. You know why he climbed the mountain by himself? He knew nobody would climb that mountain behind him. It's too steep. They'd be too tired. He got up there all by himself to pray. Why did he go by himself to pray? Because he wasn't by himself. Does that make sense? Where else do we see him pray? He gives thanks every time he eats. We see him before he dies. We have a copy of that prayer, don't we? We have a beautiful prayer, the prayer of Jesus for unity in his church. So we see Jesus rising very, very early. The question people ask me, does this mean I got to get up real early and spend time with God? You know, if I have to get up really early to spend time with my wife, we're in trouble. Neither one of us, 5 o'clock in the morning, not our time. But along about 10 o'clock at night, we're in our prime. All right? Yeah, it's not when you spend time. Now, I think people could argue that starting your day off with him is probably a good thing. I'm going to just tell you personally, my best time with God is about 11 o'clock at night. My mind is clear. He's got my full attention. There's nobody's calling me. Nobody's texting me. And I'm alone with him. I love that time. That's when I love studying at that time of night. All right? But anyway, that's not the only time I study, but that's my favorite time. And so that is how it worked for Jesus. Now let's go on and think about, again, prioritizing our time with God. How does this work for us? It's not just spending time with Jesus in order to feel good. It's about making him the priority in life and allowing him, listen to this part, allowing him to set our priorities. When's the last time you took your schedule and said, God, you go first? Here at the church, we have meeting late in the fall, and we'll sit there with the staff and say, all right, you put your events on there for the coming year, and then we're going to set this open where all the ministries, everybody else, put their events on there, and then as things come from outside of the church, if we can fit them in, we will. But these things come first. And so we set the priorities. Do you all understand that? And so we allow him to set the priorities, just like we allow the staff and the ministry team leaders to set our schedules. And so, again, let me be clear. This is really important. Don, for somebody like you, for me, knowing that it's not just spending time with Jesus because we think it makes us feel good, or somehow he pats us on the head and said, good job, you spent some time with me. That is not the purpose. Do I spend time with my wife just to say that I spent time with my wife? To feel like I did my duty as a husband? That would be pretty pitiful, wouldn't it? What do we want to do? We want to communicate. We want to enjoy each other's company. We want to laugh together. And so it's not just spending time with him in order to feel good. It's about making him the priority. And again, as the super genius table said back there, aligning our priorities with his. All right? So let's just ask a few questions, all right? I think I got a few questions in here. And so we'll move on to question number 2. That was question number 1. Here's question number 2. Is your schedule dictated by what's urgent, or is it designed to accomplish what's important? Is your schedule dictated by what's urgent, or is it designed to accomplish what's important? The enemy of what's important is always urgency. And so we have to ask ourselves some questions along this line. Let's look first at Luke chapter 10. You know this story. It's the story of Mary and Martha, all right? All right, I want you to spend some time at your table and tell me what that says about finding peace in your schedule, all right? See if you can outdo the back table. Ellen would have been over, what kind of cookie am I going to make Jesus? So here's the lesson, Ellen. Keep some in your freezer, just in case. Yeah, there you go. Just in case Jesus comes by. We're the pastor. She said Martha wants to feed Jesus, but Jesus wants to feed Martha. You're so good. You beat the back table by a mile. That was really good. Yeah, good luck keeping up with that. Now, listen. What he is not saying, this is really important. Let me just back up. Have you been to Bethany? Bethany's on the back side of the Mount of Olives. So if you come in from the Judean wilderness, you'd come through Bethany first. So coming from where Jesus lived was a long way away. He would come through Bethany. And so this is not the first time he's visited Mary and Martha. They're friends. And so it's not the first time he's eaten at their table or had their cookies. And so, but there's some hints in here where a woman named Martha opened whose home? Her home. So what's she doing? Hospitality. Jim, you know Hebrew culture. Was there anything more important in that culture than hospitality? Not much more important than hospitality. And so she was doing culturally one of the most important things. I think there's a hint right there. She was doing what the culture said was most important. But we also find another hint. Why did she go to Jesus and say, tell my sister, by the way, how often do you see anybody telling Jesus what to do? And she's got some guts, doesn't she? Why do you think she was telling him to tell Mary? But I think she's trying to make Mary look bad and maybe make herself look good. And she is upset that she's not getting the help. All these things are floating together, but she's missing something big, all right? So she's more concerned about what Jesus thinks about her than what she thinks about Jesus. And as you said, more important to feed him than to be fed by him. Never happens in that order. Never does. And so I highlighted a couple words. Verse 40, Martha was what? What does that mean? Okay, so other things on her mind. What's distraction? Rob, can you tell me what that is ever behind you? I just distracted him. I took his eyes off where his eyes needed to be. He's having a conversation with me, and so he's distracted. This happens when you preach all the time. I can't wait till Sunday and there's boats going up and down the lake. I already know what this is going to be like. All right? Somebody comes in the church, everybody's like, well, they must have had some sort of thing go on. And I'm like, I'm preaching up here. All right? Y'all ever talk? You're talking to your kids, and they're like, not paying attention. Distracted means that her attention was not where it was supposed to be. She was distracted. What was she distracted by? All the preparations that had to be made. Did they have to be made? She thought they did. She thought they did because what was she more concerned about? She was more concerned about the cultural expectations than she was about Jesus. All right? Now, I think there's a really huge lesson in there. Because you said it earlier about would you spend more time concerned about your neighbor needs you or your children need you? Or your boss is calling, but your kid's crying. I mean, we have cultural expectations that we constantly bow down to, and we miss the things that are most important. In my own life, I went to seminary. The church went from 50 to about 350. We built a new church. I served in the city council. I taught school, coached baseball, and all those things were going on at the same time. Built a new church building. But I'm going to tell you, one of the I always tried to make sure that Jesus was at the center of all of it. And then closely behind that was my wife, and then closely behind that was my kids. And I don't feel like in all that period of my life I missed anything with my kids or my wife. I can honestly say that. I don't know how I went to seminary and did all that. But I do know that the story of the jar, I knew that then. And I tried to make sure the most important things were first. That's why many times, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, I was still working on a paper because I was up with my children until 10, loving on them and playing with them. And so I'm going to tell you, it's easy to be distracted by the expectations of the world. And you who sang it earlier? Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. The things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. Secondly, Mary says in verse 42, Mary has chosen. Now, why do you think I highlighted that word? It's an act of the will. It's a decision. Mary has, you might be able to say it like this, Mary has chosen to spend her time better. She's doing what is better. She's spending her time more appropriately. He's not saying, Martha, fixing the food, showing hospitality is bad. There is a time for that. There is very much a time for that. But I want you to get back full picture. What do we do first? We don't just spend time with Christ. We make Christ the center. Here, Martha was thinking, I'll fix dinner and then I'll spend some time with Christ. Mary was saying Jesus is the center. And that's the distinguishing difference. She made him the center. Do you see what I'm saying? She wanted to hear from him. Martha was distracted by all the cares and preparations. I think it's a beautiful lesson. All right? And so, let's go ahead and summarize this. If you want to reduce the number of stressors that bombard you each day, and if you want your schedule to be saturated in God's peace, you need to intentionally build that schedule to accomplish what's important rather than be distracted by what's urgent. So I got to be honest with you. I'm just be straight honest with you. My concern about a lack of attendance at church isn't because I'm worried about the church. It's because I'm worried about the people in the church. And if they are not prioritizing God on the Lord's day, then they are certainly not doing it on all the other days. And if they're not doing it on all the other days, they are not going to be serving God wholly and completely, and they're going to lack the peace of God because they're not seeking God. And so again, numbers, I had a pastor friend, and every time he would walk out of the church, he would look at that board where the number was. I can't tell you this. I don't know how many people were in church. Maybe I should. I don't know. I have no clue. But I know who wasn't there. And unless there's a really good reason, I'm concerned because they're being distracted. And I don't say that to preach or be negative. I'm just saying that's a legitimate concern. All right? Because if you will not make the Lord a priority on the Lord's day, you certainly won't on a Saturday. Okay? Question number 3. Does your schedule express a heart captivated by what's eternally significant, or is it distracted by what's temporary? Let's go back to the story that we just had. Who was captivated in that story? Who was distracted in that story? Where's your heart in your schedule? All right? Honestly, sometimes we just have to say, we're being Martha. And can't you just hear the Lord speak to you right now? Martha, Martha, come and sit down. You got some cookies in the freezer. We'll eat those later. Eats it. Yeah, that's all right. And so, looking at the book of 1 John 2:15, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. Let's go back. If we take love as quality time spent with, let's replace that. Do not spend your quality time with the world or anything in the world. If anyone spends all their quality time in the world, the quality time that they want to spend with the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. What comes to your mind when you read this? Is God trying to keep you from happy things in this passage? Some people might think that. I like the things in the world. I mean, you're trying to keep me from that, but I want you to look at the next verse. The world and its desires pass away, but whoever does the will of God lives forever. You know, Jesus said, you'll always have the poor with you. You won't always have me. And so it's not a bad thing to go and try to feed the poor, take care of the poor. But the better thing was to know that Jesus is at your house. Probably ought to spend a little time with him. So all the fleeting stuff will leave us empty, drained, distracted, worried, and what's the word? Stressed. It's the fleeting stuff that leaves us stressed. Very few people say, man, I'm so stressed because I've been spending a lot of time with God lately. Have you ever heard that? No. God's really been showing me what he wants me to do in my life, and man, that's given me a lot of stress. Doesn't work that way. It brings peace. All right? Any questions about that? Yeah. That's exactly what happens here. Yeah. And so tonight, our study is short, but that gives you more time to go spend time with God and get your schedule straight. Do you have any thoughts or questions about what we talked about tonight, Jim? Yeah, that's good. And he didn't mind resting either. And he didn't apologize for it. You know, when Jesus was resting, there were a lot of needs. Ever think about that? If that was ministry today, they'd say, why aren't you meeting the needs? And maybe sometimes the first need ought to be to rest. Charles Stanley. Y'all like Charles Stanley? Yeah, Charles Stanley. He had a prayer closet put into his office. And he would go in there to get away and to really pray and spend time with the Lord. And then he found out that he was falling asleep in there. It's kind of like you all on Sunday mornings. He was falling asleep in there, and he felt so guilty about it. He confessed it to somebody. He said, Pastor, if you didn't fall asleep, if you fall asleep, it probably means you need to sleep. You're pastoring a church. You preach every Sunday morning. You preach every Sunday night. You teach Wednesday night. You're on the radio. You're on the TV. You've got to be exhausted. You're getting older. Sleep. But he felt guilty about that. But by sleeping, he was able to do other things. And so, trust me, I do not come to church and sleep. I do not do that. You all do that. I don't do that. And so, I want to go back, though, before we wrap up, and I want to go back full circle. Remember, the first part of our study was theology, having a single-mindedness. And when there's single-mindedness, there's no anxiety, which means there's peace. So, if we're going to have the mind of Christ in us, I hope that you see that we've demonstrated that you better spend time with Christ. You better be hearing from him. And as Jesus demonstrated, hearing from the Father, seeing what the Father's doing, knowing what his priority for your day is, and following that first and foremost. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all the other things will fit into the jar very neatly. That's the NIV version. All right? So is there anybody here just confess tonight that you have a hard time finding peace in your schedule? Kind of hard to do, isn't it? And so what do you do first? Spend your time with God first. And don't just do it as checking it off, but make him your priority. And then all the other things will begin to fall into place as you live out his will for your life. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. I love you all. God bless you, and I will see you Sunday at the lake.